Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Paul Thomas Anderson. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, Scott.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, this wonderful film marks a return for you to a place where you've set a number of the films that I mentioned earlier, which people love, San Fernando Valley. What is the history for you of that place, and why do you keep returning to it on film?
Well, it was where I was born, and I haven't moved from it.
That's a good reason. I think you've talked about this film being inspired by a couple things. Something that you just happenstance witnessed in the neighborhood, and then also somebody who you know. I wonder if you can talk about those things.
Well, right. The story has two starts. One of them is that when I moved into a new house about 20 years ago, I was walking around the neighborhood, and I was walking by a middle school, and it was picture day, which I kind of like in October, and I saw this really ambitious, like junior high kid trying to get the phone number from a really cute girl who was working at the yearbook photo place, and I filed it away in my mind, and I thought, that's a terrific premise, you know? The premise being, what if against all better judgments, this girl actually turns up for a date with this annoying kid? It's kind of like something that Billy Wilder might do, I suppose. And then I have a friendship with a guy named Gary Getzman, who's a producer. He worked for Jonathan Demme for many years, and Gary has had a very colorful life. He started at a very young age. He was a child actor in the San Fernando Valley. We grew up in the same neighborhood. And Gary's the kind of guy who will say something to you one night while you're drinking. He'll say, "Did I ever tell you about the time I was arrested for murder?" And you'll say, like, "No, but I'd love to, tell me about it." And then he'll tell you, "Did I tell you about the waterbed store that I opened when I was, And so he's one of these characters that's just full, every story. And then you talk to his friends and you realize, as much as he is lying a little bit, these are all kind of true stories. So my friendship with him, after Jonathan Demme died, we were spending a lot of time together. I just finished shooting Phantom Thread, and I was hearing all of these stories about their relationship and his youth, and somehow the connection between these two random stories ended up making sense.
And I guess in terms of, I don't know if it was more visual or tonal or what, but there were a few other coming-of-age classic movies that I think were in the back of your mind as you went about this?
Sure. Well, I think that, maybe whenever you start off and you're making a film, I imagine this happens to most filmmakers, by the way, just listening to Steven Spielberg talk, I was like, I wish I could come out here and talk about Steven Spielberg for about 3 hours. Because, there's Hitchcock and there's Steven Spielberg, it's crazy. It's so incredible. And I liked you listing off my credits. That was nice. But imagine if somebody said you directed Jurassic Park and Schindler's List in the same year.
It's pretty unbelievable.
I can't remember the question.
Let's talk about the fact that the principal stars of your film, who we just saw, as far as I know, had never really acted in any professional capacity whatsoever. Obviously, Cooper Hoffman, there's a almost like a family relationship there. Nobody, I think, has starred in more of your films than his late great father, Philip Seymour Hoffman. But less known is how you come to, And in fact, I believe that it was 16 years ago that you were first at this film festival honoring Philip Seymour Hoffman.
That's right.
So, but less obvious to people about how you might have cast this person is Alana Hayne, a wonderful talent in the music world.
Yeah.
How did you not only come to her, but then there is a long-standing tie to her as well, right? To her family.
There is. There's a long-standing tie and a very long, convoluted story. But the short version of it is that when I was 7 years old, in school, I went to school with like really tough teachers, and they were usually older, and they had white hair, and they were not friendly. And then we had an art teacher who had the most beautiful long brown hair, and she taught me how to paint, and I was a horrible student, but in her class, I was a good student. And I remembered her forever. Her name was Miss Rose, Miss Donna Rose, and she made such an impression on me that I kept all these paintings that I'd made with her all through my adult life. Flash forward to about 35 years later, 3 girls started a rock band, and I saw them on television, and they all looked like Miss Rose. And it turned out that their mom was Miss Rose. And so they came over to our house for dinner, and I didn't know that at the time. Then they came over for dinner, and they said, our mom was Miss Rose. It was this miracle. It was this kind of like not this connection that I couldn't figure out. But I went into my son's room, and there was a painting that I had kept from, and I showed it to them. I said, yeah, your mom made quite an impression on me. So now here I am, and Alana is the youngest sister of the group Hayne. They are brilliant musicians, incredible women, and in the course of working with them, it just kept coming back to me that Alana could be this girl that I'd seen with this annoying kid on picture day. Yeah, and this idea that somebody's never acted before, I mean, it's kind of like, I don't know, taking nothing away from acting, because I've worked with great ones and I love it, but it's also kind of bullshit in a way. It's like if you know, like, you know, it's about fearlessness and competence and support and respect, and I had that with her, I had that with Cooper, and yeah, it's kind of thrilling to watch 2 people that have never done it before. You know, and you can't say don't be scared. That doesn't work. But you know, to watch the growth of that happen over the course of 60 days, that's one of the great memories that I'll have of making this film, for sure.
Another, absolutely. One of the other unforgettable parts of this movie is Bradley Cooper's portrayal of John Peters, a very real person. I'm wondering, you know, there are other people here, including the Sean Penn character and others, who are clearly modeled on people who existed, but I think there are, I don't believe there are others who are actually named as the character after the person who they played. How did you decide to portray John Peters, and was John Peters aware that this was coming?
Well, for anybody who, does everybody know who John Peters is or was, right? He's the kind of notorious, he was like the most notorious Hollywood producer of the kind of character who would scream and yell, and there's girls everywhere, and he was just this fabulous creation from Hollywood's, the kind of like oozed out of Hollywood in the 70s and 80s. And back to Gary, is that Gary delivered a waterbed to John Peters' house. And I heard this story, and I thought, well, it's so fascinating. Like, did he scream at you? Did he beat you up? Or what happened? They said, oh, no, he was dating Barbra Streisand at the time, and he had to go to the movies, so he just let us into his house, and we set up a waterbed. And then so I thought that wasn't dramatic at all, and then I just created this whole concoction out of my imagination. I've never met John Peters at the time. I just thought, well, he's a Hollywood movie producer. But I did approach John Peters thinking that it was the right thing to do. I'll tell you the reason why it's important to leave it as John Peters is that he very famously dated Barbra Streisand. And that's an important thing, I think, at that time, to sort of place it in the context of what the world was, and especially for a girl like Alana. Barbra Streisand is just this miracle. And so having the reality of John Peters was important. So I did approach him and I said, I want to tell you about this story that I have. And he said, well, tell it to me because I don't read. I can't. He does read, he can read, but he just doesn't read.
Right.
And I told him the story, and I explained the whole sequence. For anybody that's seen the movie, there's a sequence, he's berating them and screaming and yelling at them. And then, and I was telling him about it, and I was telling him about how much he was screaming at Alana about her, how horrible a driver she was and all this kind of stuff. And his face started to drop a little bit. I thought, I'm losing him. And I got to the end of the story, and he said, this is great. He said, well, I just have to ask you a question. What does she look like? I said, well, she's beautiful. And he said, I would not be screaming at her. I would try to fuck her. I said, thank you, Mr. Peters. I'll take that, and I'll make a script note, and that's a much better idea of what we should do. And then I think the clincher was, he said, well, who's playing me? And I said, Bradley Cooper. He said, good casting. I said,
I could be misinformed, but I heard he also had a line that he wanted in there.
oh, yeah, no, he said, would you just, as I was leaving his house, he said, just do me one favor, get my pickup line in there. And I said, what is it? And he says, I will go up to a girl, and I would say, excuse me, do you like peanut butter sandwiches? I said, did that work? He said, absolutely.
Hey, it was the 70s.
I don't know, maybe it's so odd that they couldn't help but laugh or something like that.
Well,
Try it sometime.
it worked for him, yeah. So when you're writing, a lot of your movies have a lot of characters, but this one, it feels like maybe as many as any. And I wonder, also a lot of different, settings of different scenes. It feels like just a huge thing. And I wondered, is this something where you just write and you see where your imagination leads you, or do you actually have to kind of sit down and outline something like this?
Well, I don't outline because that somehow takes the fun away from it. But when you do have the experiences of somebody, let's say like you're adapting a book, or if I'm adapting these experiences of this real life of this person I know that I have this collection of stories. I've got 6 or 7 great ones that hopefully you can make in the film. Ideally, at its best, you have a story that has a center to it, and the center can hold, and that's this kind of half romance between these two, that they will, they won't, but they can't, and all that stuff, and then all of the peripheral stuff around it. It's a pleasure to write that way because you know you're aiming at something, and you have things that you want to get in there, but at the same time, you're still not quite sure how it'll ever get there. So there's a knowingness and also a freedom of flight, where you're like, I'm not quite sure where this is going to take us, but at least I can see way out on the horizon where I'd like to land. Yeah, it ended up being a wonderful way to work, and ended up being, well, you're never supposed to say this, it was easy to write, it was fun to write, yeah, it's supposed to be a chore and all that, like banging your, throwing pages into the trash can and all that, but it just was such joy.
So people coming out of this movie have, it's just a lot of fun. There's such a ride of a movie. And I wonder for you, what has been the most interesting kind of feedback that you've gotten from people who have seen the film?
I think it would be my son, who eventually admitted that it didn't really have a plot, but he did like it.
High praise, right? Well,
but he'd been watching it for like 8 months in the editing room and never said one word until finally it came out. And he said, can I tell you guys something? He said, don't take this the wrong way, but there's no story in this movie.
Well,
it's not wrong. It was hard to argue with. I said, good point, well made.
Well-trained young man.
I'll try and raise him right.
Yeah. Well, we are lucky that at the end of this rotation of the 5 interviews, I believe you're going to be willing to come back out and join us with Sir
contestant
Kenneth.
number 3.
Yeah.
I hope so. Yeah.
No, so this is not the end. This is just for now a pause. Thank you so much for this, and we are gonna. You could just sit for 1 sec, and right now what I'm gonna do is introduce a clip of our next guest, who is currently quarantining in Japan. This is a gentleman who has received international acclaim for projects including Happy Hour, Asaka 1 and 2, Wheel of Fortune, and Fantasy, and most recently a film for which he has become only the 3rd Japanese filmmaker ever nominated for the Best Director Oscar, after both Hiroshi Teshigahara for 1965's Woman in the Dunes and Akira Kurosawa for 1985's Ran, not bad company, to go with other nominations this year for Best International Feature, Best Adapted Screenplay, and Best Picture. Let's take a look at a scene from Drive My Car from Ryusuke Hamaguchi.